Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your dietitian and health policy enthusiast, Jessica Wilson. I talked today with Dr. Bethany Johnson about everything measles, and she has some great advice for RFK Jr. to put his measles immunity where his mouth is when he's talking about vaccines. The two of us talk about claims RFK has made about measles treatment and prevention. In the last week, folks have been passing around a clip of RFK mispronouncing carrageenan, riboflavin, and monosodium glutamate.
This is a list of ingredients from foods: carrageenan, riboflavin, monosodium glutamate, and 20 others that I can't pronounce.
Folks have had a good time pointing out that riboflavin is vitamin B2, and he should know this if he is Secretary of HHS. And the plot twist for me is that I'm sure he doesn't give a truck if he doesn't know what vitamin B2 is. I'm not a mind reader, but I'm pretty gosh darn sure he still doesn't want our food fortified with it. And he doesn't want anything to be fortified. Never mind his constant comparison to Europe and the fact that they fortified their foods with riboflavin. And he constantly talks about how healthy Eastern Asian countries are, where MSG is a common flavor enhancer. I think that America is his personal playground, just like his boss's, and is having a great time. I think he's doing a great job of getting the MAHA moms and Moms for Medical Freedom activated so that he can be a hero and not just Ken. And also, I dialed up everyone's favorite food scientist to ask how she feels about carrageenan, and she replied succinctly that RFK Jr. can pry it out of her cold, dead hands, and that we eat seaweed, a source of carrageenan, all the effing time. This all ties into this week's episode about measles and the ways that Bethany talks about cod liver oil, which is also a tie-in to Farmer Trampus Harmon's episode about giving raw milk to kiddos. And, of course, we get into the stats on fertility, which connects to Allison Pill's episode about pronatalism. I'm certain that folks are seeing that this isn't just a day-to-day topic, but instead we've been watching this roll out for months. Something we didn't get to in depth in this episode is eugenics, which needs its own episode. The first time eugenics was discussed on this show was in part 2 with Dr. Lustig. And what's happening now is connected to one of my favorite historical scientific conferences of all time, the Gathering for Better Breeding. Eugenics will need its own episode, and I'm pretty sure Bethany could come back for that and many more, because Bethany L. Johnson, PhD, recently received her doctorate in the history of science, technology, and the environment at the University of Southern California. She's also a research affiliate faculty in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She explores how institutions and individuals create, normalize, and reproduce medical technology and public health discourse from the 19th century to the present. Specifically, she studies the history of epidemics, endocrinology, and reproductive health. She has published in various journals, including Health Communication, Qualitative Research in Medicine and Healthcare, Social Healthcare of Medicine, Women's Reproductive Health, and ISIS, a journal of the History of Science Society. Her 2019 book, co-authored with Dr. Margaret M. Quinlan, is titled You're Doing It Wrong: Mothering, Media, and Medical Expertise, is available through Rutgers University Press. Bethany also loves traveling, horses, all potato chips, and anything written by N.K. Jemisin. And with that, Dr. Bethany Johnson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate your enthusiasm, we'll just say that. The wealth of information that you sent me of possible topics was phenomenal. I'm hoping that one day when I have you back for the 6th time, that you can answer the infamous question, what does, COVID actually mean? Because I still don't know. So maybe that'll be you someday.
Yeah, I love that.
Introduce yourself.
I am a historian of medicine, a historian of science broadly, but medicine more particularly. And I also do work in health communication. So I call her my academic wife because we do a lot of work together. Her name is Dr. Margaret Quinlan. She is a communication studies scholar, and we've written a dozen articles together at this point, focusing primarily on the experience of patients in reproductive and endocrinology treatment, or REI treatment, and how they communicate with doctors, nurses, sonogram techs, and their experiences of going through IVF and other treatments. And we also study how people offer support to each other on social media. So I think one of the reasons why RFK keeps getting flagged for me is because of his stuff and how it's shared on social media. So I'm in the comments trying not to do analysis on like what people are taking away from his messages, how it's landing for them. So we just did a publication on postpartum advice on TikTok, and it was as diety and exercisey as you would imagine, unfortunately, including some recommendations that I think are not safe. So we talked about what that means, why it works right now in capitalism and, post-feminism and things like that. So we asked those types of questions together. But during, finishing my PhD, I also specialized in epidemics, and I pitched a history project on the history of the aftermath of the 1918 influenza. And I started that program in 2019. I kind of did everything backwards. And did not expect a global pandemic. I was hoping to write about what it was like for other people rather than experience it myself. But it also changed the questions I was asking. I stopped expecting us to memorialize it because we kept getting new waves, And I was like, well, why were we asking people in the past to do that? Because they also had additional waves of influenza after that really bad fall wave.
Yeah.
And so we're asking them to do something that we're not doing. It was helpful, unfortunately. It's too bad I couldn't have gotten there, without that. But yeah, so that's what I'm working on right now, doctor-patient communication and the aftermath of epidemics.
Okay. So initially that was going to be our topic. And then measles. So similarly to how things, will morph and change depending on who's saying what, who's being selected, and then who's saying what on social media. Here we are.
Exactly.
So let's get to measles first, and we'll see how much time we have after that. Let's back up to RFK. And what most surprised you from October to confirmation to now?
I mean, when I was listening to, I think it was your episode with Dr. Natalie Ingram, didn't you say you watched all of the hearings?
Sure did.
I was really frustrated watching a lot of it. I particularly disliked watching him pretend he wasn't going to do anything with the vaccine schedule. Like, sir, I've been on your website. Zero chance. There's zero chance you're not going to immediately turn around. Yeah. And to watch, a doctor kind of hem and haw. And I was like, they just brought Mr. Bill into a room and were like, do you want to be elected again? Okay. This is your vote. He was like, we had a lot of productive conversations. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure we all know what that conversation was. And, when he said he thought that RFK would protect it. And I just thought, we're in bad shape here. And there was a tuberculosis outbreak already while underway in Kentucky. Now, a lot of the news sources at the time were saying it was the largest tuberculosis outbreak in history. And my sister, who's a nurse practitioner, reached out and she was like, this isn't the largest in history. And I was like, no, I don't know what they mean by that. And then they changed the headline and they were like, since antibiotics. And I was like, correct. Okay. So, in the 19th century, millions of Americans at a time had tuberculosis. And there are lots of kinds of tuberculosis. You can have tuberculosis in your intestines, for example. It's as terrible as it sounds. So I don't, when I hear about these diseases coming back, understanding that there's now antibiotic resistance in tuberculosis. I mean, obviously, any of us who think about these things, we're watching RFK. It's like watching a car accident.
Yes.
And I just think most people do not do the amount of reading that I do about this. Most people don't have your educational background or my educational background. So they're seeing information and understandably may not know what is accurate or what's being twisted just so to make it sound almost true, which is nearly everything RFK says.
And those senators, right, were like, let me tell you the 10 different ways that you are contradicting what you were saying here. And it's wild that they take the word of the one guy over 10, 20 different people who have read from bro podcasts quoting him. It's wild.
And like that anybody voted in favor of him. And also he just said things, when he said Black people need fewer vaccines, I was just I know that you want to like go back to an earlier time in history. I didn't realize that was because you wanted to go back to like pure eugenics of the early 20th century, where we just said that out loud. And that was also policy and we were forced sterilizing people. I didn't realize that was also the back that you wanted to go. But now I'm not surprised, considering what, he said some things about earlier in American history, we ate differently and people had less chronic illness. Well, okay, Jessica, can you guess what the average life expectancy for Americans was in 1900?
In 1900, I'm actually going to play this game. 56 or 63. I'm going to go 65.
46.
Stop it. Okay, I should have gone 56.
Building the Worlds That Kill Us. It's a good book. It's got some good stats in it. I knew that anyway, but 46. 46. So I'm like,
got it.
It seems like maybe, and when you said 56, I thought that was good. That was close, but it was worse. It was worse than that. And it wasn't just because so many children died. It was also because it was horrifically polluted. So the air pollution in early 20th century Philadelphia was coal-based. It was like 10 times the worst in the world in like 1999. So yeah, people had breathing problems, bronchitis, pneumonia already before they got something like measles, which can cause respiratory distress and pneumonia. So yeah, whenever any of these bros or like Huberman or whatever, like we just need to get back to him. Like, you don't know anything about that time, because if you did, you would stop saying that, because it was wild, and it's not a time we want to go back to for sure.
That's interesting to think about the way back of, because when would RFK have been born? 40 something, right? Yeah,
right at the dawn of antibiotics. He would have been born, I think, 20 years before measles came out, but he's vaccinated. He's fully vaccinated. His children, which I also love. Right? Yeah, no, just tell everybody else to take these risks that you and your family are absolutely not taking. But I guess a lot of people are like, well, he said he regrets it. I'm like, yeah, but he can't give back the benefits. If he was willing to give back the benefits, then I would believe him. Then I would take that seriously. If you want to become unimmune to all those things and just play chance, at the gambling table of contagious disease, then okay, I would take you seriously. But he can't, so he can be as sorry as he wants to. He still has the immunity.
And he can still require vaccination for people who come over to his home during COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. As we're diving in to measles, can you explain the difference between eradication and elimination? I've seen it written both ways in news media, and have definitely said eradicated myself.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if everyone in the news media is using it from understanding that there could be a difference there. Eradicated means, year over year, we have 0 cases. We have eradicated smallpox. We were able to do that because smallpox only exists in humans. It doesn't have an animal reservoir. So once we vaccinated it out of outbreaks, then it actually ceased to exist. So the last in the wild is what they say. In the wild case, I think, was 1976 or 1978. And then there was a lab case. Somebody who was studying the virus accidentally gave it to themselves, and she was okay. But that was the last recorded case. So that has actually been eradicated. They used the word eradicated in 2000 about measles because it had been a number of years since we had an outbreak. Now we would say measles is largely eliminated, because it is unusual to have an outbreak, and the case count that we have every year is very different to say what it was before vaccination. So in the 1950s, you would have had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of cases a year and hundreds of deaths. And then, as we'll talk about, many thousands of people with various complications that lasted a lifetime and then eventually, in some cases, ended their life. But now we're saying largely eliminated because we're seeing the uptick of cases. We can't call it eradicated when 250 plus people have tested positive in Texas. And we know there's more cases than that because of the R number, the R naught, or the R0, which is the rate of spread, all that. COVID is 2 to 3 in a totally unvaccinated population. Measles is 12 to 18. So one infected person can infect 12 to 18 others. Now, there is some immunization around the community where it kind of broke out, but you're still getting double and triple in many cases that R number that something like COVID has. So we can't say it's eradicated anymore. We could go back to calling it eradicated or mostly eliminated, but we have to be really above 95% or above immunization rate in the population. And then you won't usually see breakthrough cases. I would actually be surprised if they went back to saying eradicated unless they had a successful global immunization effort. Now that we have detached ourselves from the World Health Organization, I don't see what the future for that is. So take the biggest donor out and those types of campaigns become far less possible.
Can you explain to folks that 95% for a sec?
Yeah. So 95% is what's called herd immunity. And that means you have enough of the population vaccinated that the folks that cannot get vaccinated, such as infants, and they don't vaccinate infants, not because the vaccine is dangerous, but because you get antibodies from your mother, which wane around a year. So at 6 months, now they will do that. So you might have seen on social media and on the news, in some cases, they will vaccinate 6-month-olds right now. And the reason is because there's an active outbreak in their area. They wouldn't have necessarily done that before because they wanted to wait for the mother's antibodies to wane before asking the body to make its own new set of antibodies. Again, it's not dangerous. It just wasn't necessary, but it's necessary in these emergent contexts. And then also you have people that are immunocompromised that are getting cancer treatment, and maybe they couldn't be immunized because they had a particular allergy. There's lots of reasons that people can't be immunized, and they depend on us. So every time RFK says it's an individual choice, I'm like, it's not really. It's an individual choice in that an individual might be making it, but you're making a community choice 100%.
Yeah. The population or that county, I believe, had an 80% vaccination rate. Am I making that up?
No, I thought it was between 80 and 82. So well below what you would need to avoid an outbreak. Yeah. And there was a school somewhere else in the state where the kindergarten class, and I remember this number because I was so horrified. The kindergarten class has an MMR vaccination rate of 14.9%.
Holy smokes.
And they went on Instagram, again, with the social media tie, with the guy that ran a pastor who ran the religious school that has 14.9%, wore, I think, a t-shirt or a sweatshirt that said least vaccinated and did had balloons behind him, did an Instagram video and was talking about health freedom and which you can choose. You are practicing a kind of freedom. The thing that concerns me there, though, is that your children can't really consent in the way that an adult can consent, certainly not to die or to become gravely ill. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us, right? I'm not alone there, not on this call and not in this audience, thinking that that's not something children should be asked to hold or bear when they don't have to.
Right. Like the willingness for parents to make that decision for their child. And, the statistics that get thrown around, it's less than 0.1% of the people who get measles will die. Sure, the likelihood of your child dying might be 0.1%, but are there any other reasons that parents might be concerned?
Ooh, thank you for asking this question, because this is why I reached out to you. You were really patient and kind when I was like, okay, so here's my thing. I literally study the fallout of influenza. I've written 60 pages on it in what will hopefully become a book project. And viruses do what they want. That is not a scientific statement. Anybody listening to this, I'm neither a lab scientist nor am I a trained medical practitioner. I am talking about reading people's medical files, reading what their doctors have said, what they have said about their experience, and what is known. And I can report other scientists having found out about measles. So a recent, and RFK doesn't really deal with this, surprisingly, because I think he tends to dance around things that are really hard, so he doesn't have to speak to them. So in 2015 and 2016, and for people that don't already follow Science Wiz Liz, that's a great follow right now. She talks about a lot of these issues. She does have a PhD in the lab sciences. She does have training in biology and can speak with, real expertise about this. We have talked together about viral fallout, but they found something called immune amnesia. And so really, if you contract measles, not if you get a bad case, not if you get gravely ill and go to the hospital, if you contract it at all, there is a likelihood that your immune system is on, it's like putting your phone back to factory settings. Like you are now a 2-month infant again. If you've had previous vaccines, cute, you have to have them again. If you've had colds or viruses before, your immune system does not recognize them. And not only did they find that this can happen to anyone who contracts measles, one paper I found at the NIH through the PubMed system projected that as many as 40% of people who contract measles have a complete immune amnesia or partial immune amnesia. So that means that your kid could have a fine case of measles. It could be real easy, real light. They don't get a fever, they're fine. And they could spend the next 3 years sick all the time and miss so much school that they actually have to be held back a grade, for example. There are real world consequences to these diseases, even if you don't get really sick. You and I talked earlier about pneumonia being a very common complication. And in fact, the 3 things that RFK says you should treat with, he said clarithromycin, he gave a steroid and vitamin A, which we'll get back to. But the first 2, what I kind of was like groaning when I read that, because the first 2 are good treatments for pneumonia, so if you're giving those 2 things to a kid, because clarithromycin is not going to do jack for measles, that's a virus. An antibiotic doesn't do anything for that, right? So what you're telling us is that you're talking to people whose kids have active pneumonia because they got measles, because it's not a rare complication. Deadly pneumonia gets us to those rare numbers where you're at 1 in 1,000. You can also experience, you can lose your hearing, you can lose your sight, or just have extensive ocular damage. So it can change whether or not you have 20/20 vision or astigmatism or some of those things. It can cause brain swelling, which can cause intellectual disability, developmental delays. A lot of these kids that are getting this are young. So it's going to actually change the whole trajectory of their development, which means you're not just impacting them now, even if they have a late case, that's years and years. And then the other one that I mentioned to you is called SSPE. That is subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Well, all we need to know about that is that 1 in 3,500 cases, if you are older than 1, and 1 in about 609 cases, more or less, if you're 12 months or under, develop SSPE. It can develop as many as 9 years later. It's a degenerative neurological disease. It is deadly, and there is no treatment. So some of these people who contracted measles could be at risk for this. And they've already gotten their death sentence, even though they had, their death is already developing somewhere in the deep neurological recesses of their mind. And we won't know that unless one of these folks gets sick. And that's also why it's dangerous not to know how many cases there are, because then you don't know what to look for in terms of some of those, something like SSPE. I just can't imagine not vaccinating and thinking I was keeping my child safe and then watching them die a horrible death from a latent illness they got from a disease like measles. I have 2 children. It's unthinkable to me.
You mentioned the steroid, the antibiotic, and then the vitamin A / cod liver oil. When I am seeing that in like the media and social media, the message that seems to be taken away, or the way that it's framed, is like, this will prevent measles. Like all you have to do Yeah. It seems that all you have to do for measles is take vitamin A. And the way that comes across seems to be, well, I'll just be taking my vitamin A and I'll be fine.
Right.
But that's actually not the words that are being written or said.
No, it's not. You and I both know there are two ways to prevent future measles cases. One is to have measles and survive it and get the antibodies. The other way is to get the MMR vaccine and to get a live attenuated tiny piece of virus. Your body makes the antibodies and then you don't get it. That's it. That's it. That's the only options. When I'm seeing the vitamin A thing, I think, people will see that the WHO recommends that all children that have measles within the first 24 hours, they get 2 doses. So we got to remember too that the WHO includes the whole world. They deal with and support a lot of children who don't necessarily meet vitamin A needs through their diet. Now, this is where your expertise comes in. As a dietitian, I have read that the Western diet, which I guess is high in like cereals and animal products, meets your sort of vitamin A day-to-day needs normally, right?
Right. And even if your diet does not, there's likely something in your life that is giving
fortified
enough. Yeah. Flintstone vitamins, for example.
Amazing.
Yes. Or
I can't wait for a comment to be like, those are poison.
Yeah. They have red dye in them. But yes, in other countries, that's why the genetically modified golden rice, which if folks can't see me, that's in quotation marks. Yes. Went out to countries to fortify, staples with vitamin A, and it's a fat soluble vitamin, right? So it's not like a B or a C where if we don't get it for a day, we're going to pee it out and need it again. We are storing it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's why. So when people are reading this WHO thing, it looks like if you maybe don't have more training, that could look like a treatment. You have to give it to them within 24 hours. That must be doing something. It is doing something. It is preventing ocular damage and the potential for blindness to develop if the case becomes severe. So doctors, to your point, because it is stored, they want to give it right away so that people have the right level of vitamin A over the course of the illness. The child that died who was sick for 3 weeks with measles. So if you're thinking about how do I make sure they have enough vitamin A over a longer period of time, you're going to want to give a significant amount, but you're also going to give a safe amount. And this is my concern. Doctor knows what a safe amount is. You probably know what a safe amount is for vitamin A for kids. I would not be handing out vitamin A to my kids without the advice of another professional because I don't know what is safe. What I do know is that they give people really high doses of vitamin A for things like in Accutane. That's vitamin A. You have to get your liver levels checked. You have to get pregnancy tests. You have to be you can't mess around with vitamin A. So this idea that people are just, here handing out vitamin A, like I would rather you did it in a Flintstone vitamin because at least I know there it's capped, right? Because it's
that's a child level,
right? It's a child level, and the FDA actually monitors vitamin A products for proper dosage. It doesn't monitor cod liver oil. That's a supplement. The FDA does not test cod liver oil. I am not out here saying I don't give nutritional advice. That's your department. What I do want people to understand is cod liver oil is not tested for even whether or not it contains cod liver.
Yeah.
It's a supplement. It could have any kind of oil in it. Not only do you not know what's in it, you don't know how much or the concentration necessarily, because what it says on the bottle and what it contains don't have to be the same because it's not regulated. So especially when and I'm like, of course, this is so RFK Jr., right? We don't want to do big pharma. Right. So instead of telling you to take vitamin A or make sure your kids have Flintstone vitamins, he would never say that. He says cod liver oil because to him, that's the natural way. And I hear that. I go, okay, but that's unregulated. People have no idea. And if they have enough to eat, they're already getting enough vitamin A. There is real dangerous stuff that happens when you get too much vitamin A. And since your body stores it, if you're starting to give someone vitamin A every day through cod liver oil on top of their diet, I don't know what the implications are of that, but it's something I would really be careful with. I would really feel nervous about it.
I need to search for that one on TikTok and see what people are doing with cod liver oil and vitamin A supplementation. I hadn't thought about checking that out because it is everywhere right now. Debunking it but also therefore reinforcing it is what we'll see.
Exactly.
RFK says this, it's wrong. RFK says that. Yeah. what we're learning is that he's saying this. So
yeah. And I'm also not saying like, oh, if it's FDA supported or, I don't think that pharmaceutical corporate officers sit around thinking about my best interest and what is good for me. I'm not confused about that. They want to make money. That's their job. In a capitalist society, they owe their shareholders. That is their legal responsibility. And they do sell products that support people's lives. You talked in your book about you need to take a medication that helps your day-to-day. I also need to do that. I'm neurodivergent. I have ADHD. I had a wild time with your, what was him? The dopamine diet guy?
Dr. Wiss.
Yes. I was like, wow, what if you have a dopamine problem? And I was like, you know what this guy just convinced me to do? Go eat some crunchy, like salty foods. Cause like maybe that will help my late afternoon energy dip. But yeah, it was just really interesting to hear him talk about this as if everybody has the same brain and everybody would have the same reaction. And there were no people that maybe needed dopamine for very particular. We all need dopamine, but I super need it. So, that was a wild time. Just like RFK Jr. is like, just do cod liver oil. Okay. Do you know what people are eating? Do you know what their baseline diets are? Do you know what they have access to? How much can they spend on this supplement? He's not going to provide it for them. He had a lot to say about the types of diets people should be eating. Well, okay. Are you going to have the government provide those diets for everyone? Probably not.
Right. So are you referring to the New York Times article I sent you? That was basically like, be healthy, eat fruits
healthy.
Be healthy and you won't get measles. And I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. This is amazing. I love this is fine. What?
Yeah, exactly. Eat a rainbow diet and you too will magically create antibodies with no material to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, could it be simpler? Exercise moderately. Yes. Have a healthy lifestyle. And you don't get viruses. No. Yeah. That's how it happens.
There was a piece about RFK. I think it could have been in the Times, but the author was saying, somebody like RFK comes around every 100 years and was talking about Kellogg, the guy that ran Kellogg. So if anybody listening, I really recommend the book. Is by Erica Yannick. It's called Marketplace of the Marvelous. And she researches these 19th century hydrotherapy, homeopathy, Thompsonism, what Kellogg did at his sanitarium. You will be shocked to learn that he suggested getting enough sleep, drinking more water, having a balanced diet, and getting exercise, which are things that we know are helpful. They are not things that prevent these kinds of contagious infectious disease. His people had, by the time they got to his sanatorium, many of them had already had measles. They had outbreaks in his program as well, because it didn't matter that they were eating that cereal, his favorite. And they had no spice on their food. He hated spicy food. He thought it led to vice. It was too exciting, and that made people excited in other ways. And I'm not being weird. He literally thought that. He was like very concerned about that. So this isn't new stuff either. So when I hear people being like, I'm going to tell you something that doctors are not telling you, like literally doctors and non-doctors have been saying this for 150 years. But thank you. I agree with you. We should try to eat a diverse diet. And you're also looking at a country where a lot of people are having trouble making ends meet. So to just say that is to also say, I either don't know or don't really care what's happening to the rest of you, because there was no policy behind his claim that we should just eat healthy diets. I was like, okay, and how?
Yes. I mean, I would love the answer to that question. Like, let's have that be policy. Yep. if we can, yeah. Well, I mean, you and I know. I would love for them to know.
Yeah.
So that we could do it. There's a difference. You mentioned the Kellogg's of it all, and there's been some conversation about measles and vaccination as eugenics, like, continuing the eugenics project. And I was saving it for this conversation to hear more from you. And what it rings for me is there are populations who are not, like, for cultural or religious reasons, just not interacting with medical communities. And there are the MAHA moms and the moms for medical freedom that he was relying on, who are not vaccinated. And from the eugenics point, I would assume he wouldn't want them to get measles or perish. But like, that's just me and my initial thoughts. So I'm curious about what you think.
No, I mean, that has been surprising to me too. I'm like, okay, so if we think about the eugenics movement that really hit Europe and America in the 1870s, Francis Galton, who was Darwin's cousin and all that, by the time you hit, 1910, I'll never forget, this is an Alexandra Ministern article. She's a historian, and historians like to pull weird quotes. And I was like, girl, you hit it out of the park. This is wild. This doctor said about the populations that she was tasked with serving in Idaho, I believe, Idaho or Iowa. She said, you can't make a leather purse out of a sow's ear, meaning like, I can't make you something nice out of these people. Yeah. They are just not quality people all the way down. Right. And she was assigned as a public health officer to educate and provide public health services for these rural folks. And so, yeah, when these MAHA moms, I'm like, okay, but you are educated white ladies.
Yeah, that part.
When eugenics blew up, like, y'all were the folks being told to have more children. Teddy Roosevelt was like, have babies so we don't have to deal with white suicide. That is the term that he used. He was worried that educated, he didn't care about poor white folks. We don't want you to have babies. No. We want the wealthy, pretty, quote unquote, ones. They were pretty because they had money to take care of themselves and they had servants doing a lot of their work. That's why they looked nice. And he wanted them to have six.
Well, and Elon today, like, and here we are. Right?
Elon.
Allison. Yeah. I had my dad read the intro to the episode I did with Allison Pill about fertility, and he has not forgotten that, like, that pronatalism exists. And, at least once a week, he'll just be like, what is happening? I'm like, I understand, Dad. It is very disturbing. So Elon, yes, again, wants the wealthy whites to procreate. And this will tie into the article you initially sent me about specifically mumps and infertility. But in addition to the article, is the infertility just like people opting out of not wanting kids? Because birth rate is the only thing that I can find that speaks to like how fertility is measured.
I don't remember if Allison talked about the flip side of the coin of pronatalism, which is, and you'll hear this everywhere, infertility rates are on the rise.
Yeah.
Hear this everywhere, right?
Yeah.
That's not, and I will tell you, I don't think anyone knows that it's there. In my book, I wrote the best footnote of my life. And it is particularly showing, I went through studies over 80 years and I listed the infertility rate of men and women over an 80-year period. And every single one of them was between 6 and 10% for 80 years. And at every one of those decades, Jessica, someone was like, but the fertility rates are going down, but the sperm is disappearing is what has been said in the last 10 years. And do I find it surprising that people are worried about sperm counts in the middle of a hyper masculine rise of fascism? I'm not surprised that people think that sperm counts are going to zero, because what they're actually worried about is their masculinity in the world they've created. But that doesn't mean that sperm counts are going to zero. For 80 years, people have been in the 6 to 10% range. Now, in some communities, you might have a 15% rate or something. Something we also have to think about in that is pollution. Pollution can cause fertility. Nuclear radiation can cause infertility. mumps can cause infertility. A lot of these diseases can cause infertility. So yeah, if we're going to reintroduce these diseases in the population, we will see a bump in infertility rates. It won't be significant because infertility is a pretty rare outcome from something like mumps, but we could see a 0.7% bump. We sure could.
The article was interesting that you sent me, and I'll have you explain it. The concern was not at all the actual infertility. The concern was that Merck, the pharmaceutical company, was not giving accurate reporting about how effective it was against mumps. So if you're reading all of these things, and you talk about this very well, it looks like the vaccine is giving you like lower sperm counts. Like if I didn't know how to read things, that I would come away with that for sure.
Absolutely. And NBC, not at all connected to RFK Jr., put out an article around the same time. So RFK Jr. put this post up on the Children Family Defense. I don't recommend this website. I'm just going to say globally, but I also don't recommend it if you don't have training in how to read medical research, because it's written in a really convincing way. If anyone is listening to this and you feel like I found some really good information there, you found information that most people would believe. You're not an unintelligent person. It was well written. It was very convincing, hyperlinked to all get out. And I followed those links.
That part.
And he's like, here's the study. Okay, but in that study, the cohort was 11. So that's not or not.
One was reporting the effectiveness of the MMR vaccine. And the percentage they pulled into the article was after one shot, not after two.
Yeah.
Summary at the end. Get two.
Yeah. And so when NBC posted this, they said that 94% of the mumps cases in America were among the vaccinated. Why wouldn't you think that the vaccine doesn't work? Right? That totally agrees with what the RFK was saying, in that it's not, he said on his website in that article we were reading that it caused teenage cases. Yeah. Okay. So anyone who is like, okay, why did you say those things and you're still defending the vaccine? Here are, let's say, 3 reasons. Maybe I have 4. We'll see. The first reason is that mumps is not captured quite as well by the vaccine as measles is. So the reason we know that people are not getting measles from the vaccine is because it's the D strain. It's a different clade. The A strain is in the vaccine. So people would have to have the A strain when they were testing positive for it for us to even ask that question. They're not. Also, we just know that vaccines don't cause the disease. But in mumps, the mumps virus that we're seeing now in human populations, it has traveled enough from the mumps vaccine that the mumps part of the MMR is now more similar to a flu vaccine, mild to mild, right? It doesn't do as much work preventing, but it keeps the real wild stuff from happening, like hospitalization, orchitis, which is the swelling of the testicles, which can result in a change in sperm morphology or sperm count. Okay, so that's one reason. So we have the virus itself changing. However, we had such a high vaccination rate that didn't matter. It could start to matter, and they might tweak or add one of the mumps strains in there to make sure that it has better coverage. The second reason is, to your point, when I would have gotten the MMR in like 1982, they didn't recommend getting 2 doses until 1986 or 87 in the US. I don't even know if I had 2 doses. At my own annual visit a month ago, I was like, can I get my titers checked, or can you just give me a booster? And he was like, I will 100% just give you a booster. We'll do that today. And I was like, great. And he was like, measles is going to be in North Carolina in 20 minutes. And I was like, this is why you're my physician. So I got one because there wasn't a risk of me getting one. So you do have these populations that either got one that maybe didn't last as long if they got it in the late 50s, early 60s, or they only got 1 dose because they got it in the early 80s. In the UK, they didn't suggest 2 doses until 1999. That's a huge cohort of people that would probably be wise to get a booster if there was an outbreak. So that's a second reason. And that second reason is where his mistake lies. So when he's talking about people who are getting it when they're teenagers, it's because they didn't have a second dose. And in the thing that he linked, the authors went out of their way to say every single one of the people that got mumps when they were teens were in the middle of an outbreak. They didn't randomly get mumps. There was a massive community outbreak, and they were at the grocery store and they came home with mumps. There was a mumps epidemic in their area, and they happened to have not had a second dose, and they had a breakthrough case. But his claim is because they got it as teenagers, Merck can cause mumps, which is bonkers. That is and both of the articles he cited, even the ones that had a really terrible, 11-person cohort, both of them said directly, the rate of mumps has gone down precipitously because of the MMR vaccine. He never manages to pull that stuff over. Somehow he misses it. And all of the authors suggested getting the MMR vaccine, like you said, and make sure you get 2 doses. Right. And the third reason that people are getting mumps cases is because vaccination rates are declining and we no longer have herd immunity for mumps.
It seems simple.
See, I'm like, wait, this is not, no one, people, Elon Musk coming to power in the way he has right now has solidified to me something I've always told my history students. You make people work too hard for the conspiracies you believe in. No one works that hard for the conspiracy. For them to get what they want, they don't have to do that much work. You just have to convince poor people that are white that they just want to be better than Black people, but they could still stay poor and be better than Black people. That's what we did for 200 years in our country. That is way easier than building the Illuminati, for example, and so it's people don't have to try that hard to do things that aren't great. So whenever I hear people talking about well, they're putting this chip and blah, I'm like, why do you think they're going to spend that kind of money to do that? They could just not and pay their shareholders and their CEO $1 squillion, which is what they want to do as a company that wants a high stock price. Those types of things, a lot of the stuff I see from MAHA moms, they don't want you to know this, or they're doing this. I'm like, they are the CDC. They don't have enough funding, particularly now, but they didn't have enough funding before. They don't have infrastructure to do this thing that you're giving them credit for. But there are really wealthy people that have a lot of influence that are selling you $300 a month supplements that do have something to gain from not giving you what they're saying they're giving you. And I'm not accusing those folks of running elaborate conspiracy theories. I just think that that we know of yet. But I do have a raised eyebrow to a lot. I will say a raised eyebrow. Huberman, man, what? And the guys that eat raw liver all the time. Yep. And you have to be running something behind this. No one does this on purpose. That's so gross to just
So I feel like this will be just one episode with you. Like I said, of 6. I need you to come back.
I would love to.
So recording this is 5 years since WHO declared COVID a pandemic. And something that we brought up on the show is what happened to people? What happened to people after COVID? And so, you've done a lot of pandemic research, and I would love to ask you, what happened to people, not just with the distrust in science, with the openness to conspiracy theories, but also it seems like people lost their mind somewhere down there and they picked up another one. That just was incapable of, thinking critically or just I don't know. But you know what? That's why I'm going to invite you back. And I hope you can help a lot of us who have had that question. What happened? I don't get it.
How did we get to cell phone towers? Again, with my conspiracy theories, it doesn't have to be that hard. No one built a cell phone tower that sent out a signal. That was easier for folks to believe than that this vaccine wasn't rushed through. Well, I know that they started doing the mRNA vaccine research in the 1980s. And it was a woman who believed someone needed here so she could do her research. She wanted the funding for it. She worked at Columbia University for decades. Her colleagues told her that her mRNA research was a waste of time. She was basically bullied for 15 years and didn't give up and eventually won the Nobel Peace Prize because it was her technology that is the basis for the mRNA vaccine. It was not a new technology. It was not unstudied. We were 25 years into it, right? And when they had MERS and it was like going around in camels and they had it isolated in the Middle East and they were able to, because it was in a couple of nomadic groups, they were able to really isolate it and keep it from spreading. They started making a vaccine for that and then it died out. They used that same framework to build ours. So it was that a literal COVID vaccine had already been started. So I was like, why is it easier to believe that it's a cell phone tower? And that, and like part of it is we don't know our history. And I understand why people think it's boring. I'm not one of those people. I think it's weird as hell and I love it. But I think because we kind of don't know what all they're doing up there at the NIH and the CDC and the NSF and the NEH and all of that, it makes sense if you don't know and you don't have access to those spaces and to those people that you might be nervous about it. But I think really deeply, and tell me if this rings true, just on a deep sociological level, when something is really scary, what really helps is having something to blame it on.
Yeah.
I think it's a safety mechanism, but just to watch it happen in real time on TikTok was like, okay, but we've never done this as a human population before. And you saw how fast and how wild it spun out. It's like, we need to not talk about this in like 15 to 30 second videos because it gets weird so much faster than if it's just in the newspaper. I never thought I'd be fighting for like, we have less technology, let's be Luddites, but I'm almost there after that pandemic experience. Like, what if we did less with these communicative techniques? Yeah. Just write it in a letter.
Send it. Yes. Bethany, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me and letting me just, sound off. I've been wanted to say like, but. So thanks.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And again, I look forward to having you back.
I look forward to being back.
Thanks so much to Dr. Bethany Johnson for coming on the show. As I've said, expect to hear from her again. Next week is part 2 of the episode about soda taxes. I was thinking it would just be a 2-parter, but there's a possibility for 3 now because there's just a lot for us to unpack about public health and policy. So feel free to continue sending in your feedback. And then I've got a surprise and joyous episode for you all in April to remind us that even though we can do this hard work and may have spiraling thoughts, it simply can't be that way 24/7 during this administration. Until next time, friends, make it awkward. If you like this episode, you can share it with a friend, rate it, you can review on Apple Podcasts, or leave a comment on Spotify, and my dad will read them on the show. You can also join the Patreon and help keep the show going. I'm Jessica Wilson. The show is edited and mixed by the fully vaccinated Jen Jacobs, is supported by Patreon members, and the legacy of Sacramento Upward Services.